Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube for Pigs Round 3 Captaincy Recommendations. Last week was a bit of a weird one. Late outs, injuries, carnage galore. I hope you're able to navigate that and at least get yourselves a solid captaincy score. I had the VC on Tom De Koning, who looked on track for a 140 before running out of gas. I didn't take that score and I gave Dane Zorko the captaincy for his big 136. So I was very happy with that one. Now, let's look ahead to round 3. And again, we're using mostly 2024 data, so I'm probably still taking a 120 VC this week rather than rolling it on a bigger C, a bigger risk just with the data we've got. But let's get into it. Number 3, Vice Captain, Connor Rozee. Connor's off to a hot start and he makes my captain video for the 3rd week in a row. He sneaks in this week due to his form and this being his midfield right now with no Zach Butters. Against an Essendon midfield that's done okay in the clearances for the first 2 rounds, but has shown absolutely no accountability or defensive intent in transition. And that's going to benefit Connor to a T. He's an elite runner, racks up possessions in all areas of the ground. Jordan Dawson and Isaac Rankin also fit the bill as elite runners who rack up possessions in all areas of the ground, and they just scored a 124 for Dawson and a 97 in only 57% game time for Rankin. They did that against the one-way runners that are the Essendon Football Club. But that isn't all. The Bombers are actually Rosee's most profitable opponent. He averages 112 points from his 7 career games, and Marvel Stadium is actually his second most profitable venue after Adelaide Oval. So this is a matchup he loves at a venue that he loves scoring at. So this is a perfect matchup for him to continue his hot streak, and I don't see any Bombers mids being able to keep up with him or apply any sort of defensive pressure if last week was anything to go on. Number 2, Clary is back. 130 last week against the Kangaroos, despite his team getting absolutely spanked in the last quarter. He had nearly 40 disposals. Exciting times. If 40 disposal Clary is back, that's going to make me happy. This week he gets a matchup with Gold Coast, which is actually his most profitable opponent throughout his entire career. We think of the 200 scores that he's piled on Adelaide in the past, or his previous domination of the Cats, but no, the Suns are his bunny. A career average of 132 from his 9 career games against them is mental. But it isn't just Clayton that the Suns allow big points to. Over the last 10 games, they're the 4th best matchup for inside midfielders. To end last year, they gave up 136 points to Jack Viney and 145 points to Zach Merritt. And in their only game this year, the Suns gave up a ton to Jack Graham. No offence to Fridge, but he is no Clayton Oliver. This could be a big one, and I think it's a worthy VC consideration for you. But it's not my number 1 VC because that is Tom De Koning. I started TDK because I could see myself using him as a VC in 4 of the first 5 rounds. Well, here we are again in round 3, and here he is again in my video. He scored 148 in round 1 and 104 in round 2. Like I said, he was on track for a big one last round, but he ran out of juice. I think he was over 70 at half time and then just faded. I don't think that's happening this week. A premium ruckman in a matchup with Tim English always perks up my ears. Do you want to know why? Well, let me reel off some recent scores against the Bulldogs ruckman. If we go back to round 18 of last year, Tom De Koning himself played Tim English, scored a 95 despite ruck sharing with Pitnet. The next round, his brother Sam De Koning scored a 95 despite being a part-time ruckman. Round 20, Brodie Grundy got a 96, and Brodie Grundy looking a bit washed. Anyway, that's 3 mid-90 scores from OK ruckman, but don't worry, it gets better. Straight after that, Max Gawn cracks in with a 130. Then Riley O'Brien, 117. Then Tristan Cherry pops a 141. I know that was against Lobb and not English. English wasn't playing, but they're very similar in the hit-out department. They probably play quite similar, so I think Cherry still would have destroyed English. Round 24 of last year, Kieran Briggs a 113. And then in the elimination final, Lloyd Meeks smashes him for a 127. Then we go into this year. Tristan Cherry in round 1 pops a 122. and last week Darcy Cameron got a 112 despite ruck sharing with the big cock. Now to summarise, in the last 10 games, against the Bulldogs, no opposing ruckman has scored under 95 SuperCoach. That's despite some of them ruck sharing or being part-time ruckmen. And in that, there have been 4 big scores of 120 plus when the primo ruckman gets a hold of him. And I fully expect TDK to take advantage of a ruckman and honestly, a midfield brigade that give up plenty of points to opponents. Not saying Bulldogs are a bad team at all, but their ruckman and their midfield do sometimes leak points. And I expect Tom De Koning to take advantage of that. Now, point of difference. This could be a VC or a C. He plays kind of on the Saturday, so you could really go with either. But my pod captaincy recommendation scored 136 in round 1. And then that was Noah Anderson. And then I copped a Baz Smith DMP last week. So I'm going to claim that my point of difference is still averaging 136. But I'm not resting on my laurels. I'm going bigger this week, with a pod recommendation that's only in 7% of teams. Jack Sinclair against Richmond is going off this week. Over the last 10 games, Richmond are a slightly positive matchup for wingmen, a very positive matchup for designated kickers, and the easiest matchup in the league for defenders in general. Jack Sinclair fits all of those descriptions. His last 2 matchups with Richmond, both last year, he scored a 123 and a 124. I think that's probably his flaw this game. He's coming off a score of 145 last weekend. This is a Tigers team that just allowed tons to Kane Farrell and Logan Evans, and a 127 to Jace Burgoyne. Good players, no doubt, but not Jack Sinclair good. I think you could also consider Nasir as a VC for this game, but I'm recommending Sinclair for owners as he's shown a higher upside in the past. Now, time for some captains. Noah Anderson. What's going on with Pig? He's now recommended Noah Anderson as a captain in 2 out of 2 games away from home. Doesn't he know he averaged 90 outside of Gold Coast last season? Yes I do. But I'm here backing the natural improvement and the increased consistency that I expect to see from a first-year captain of a club. He scored 136 against West Coast in round 1, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar score here against the Demons. West Coast are the easiest team for inside midfielders to score against over the last 10 games, but Melbourne are right behind them in second place. They just gave up 124 points to Tom Powell, tons to LDU and Simpkin, after in round 1 giving up 104 to Finn Callaghan and 115 to Tom Green. Not big enough scores for you? Well, how about the 186 they gave up to Nick Dacos in the last game of last year? Or the dual 120 pluses they gave up to Sam Flanders and Noah Anderson himself the week before that? That's what I thought. But that's not all I'm coming at you with. Noah himself averages 112 points per game against the Demons. That's actually his 3rd favourite matchup, and he dominates the MCG, averaging 110 at that venue. That's his most profitable ground. So I'm backing the Suns' new captain to become a great scorer away from home this season. I'm expecting him to prove it to everyone this week. Number 4, Andrew Brayshaw. Andrew started the year okay without being on fire. 2 low tons to start the year. However, travelling to Geelong is always tough, and the Swans midfield matchup in round 2, that's always a bit of a tough matchup too. If you started Brayshaw, it was for his great early run, and that starts this week. A game at home against the Eagles. I just told you that West Coast are the easiest opponent for inside midfielders, and if this one goes to script, Freo should have the run of the game in this one. Andrew scored 137 and 83 in his matchups last year with West Coast. Which one of those scores do I think he'll get this week? I'm probably leaning closer towards the 137 than the 83. Freo haven't won a game this year, and I'm expecting a big statement win in this one in the Derby. For them to do that, Brayshaw needs to fire and fire all game. Remember, this is an Eagles team that just gave up 133 to Lachie Neale, 132 to Hugh McCluggage, 117 to Josh Dunkley, and 104 to Will Ashcroft, all in the same game. My number 3 option is his teammate, Caleb Sarong. Caleb has been tagged 2 weeks in a row. That's not ideal for owners, but I think he makes it up to them this week with a big one. His last 3 games against the Eagles have netted him an average of 125 SuperCoach, including a 146 back in 2023. So when talking about Brayshaw, I listed off how 4 Brisbane players were able to score over 100 against the Eagles last week. Well, let me take you back to 4 weeks prior to that. So we see spike scores of 137 from Matt Rao, 136 from Noah Anderson, 130 from Jack Bowes, 121 from Max Holmes, 146 to Paddy Cripps, 119 to George Hewitt, 123 from Tom Powell, and 122 from Harry Sheasel. Just to summarise that, in the past 5 weeks of footy, the Eagles have allowed 2 midfielders to score 120 plus on them every single week. And in some cases, those 120s have turned into 130s and 140s. So I fully expect Andrew and Caleb to capitalise on that matchup, and I'm ranking Caleb slightly higher here just due to his more inside contested game, which usually benefits Supercoach scoring. Now, okay, we've got the fun stuff out of the way. We're getting serious now. Josh Dunkley slides in as my number 2 captaincy option this week. He's averaging 145 Supercoach points over his first 2 games of 2025. That was by pumping out a 173 in round 1 and backed it up last week with a 117. Now, a matchup with Geelong at the Gabba. Josh's last 2 meetings with Geelong at the Gabba have netted him scores of 98 and 115. Solid, but not amazing. Well, this recommendation comes off the back of Geelong's midfield becoming an easy matchup for inside midfielders. Last week they gave up scores of 162 to Jack Macrae, 111 to Zach Jones, and 106 to Jack Steele. And if we go back to the end of last year, there was a 136 to Steele, a 160 to Sheasel, a 148 to Treloar, and a 144 to Richards. But if it was just the easy matchup, I'd probably be recommending Lachie Neale over Josh Dunkley. So why aren't I? First up, I expect Neale to cop some attention from Mark O'Connor. But second is the precipitation. Brisbane is forecast to have 3 days of rain leading up to this game, and then 45 mils of rain on the day of the game. If it's raining during the match, that often leads to less clean disposals and more stoppages. And people that benefit from that are ruckman, and also the contested possession, clearance, tackling beast midfielders. For Brisbane, that is Josh Dunkley. I could see this if it's a bit wet and slippery and there's, a bit of fumbles and more stoppages. I could see this being a 10 tackle game for Josh, which often leads to a spike score from him. So if you own him, I think he's a very safe captain option this week. My number 1. Now, what have we here? 2 ex-Bulldogs at number 1 and number 2. Thank you, Bevo. Jack Macrae. Let me hit you with some stats. I just told you that Josh Dunkley is averaging 145 Supercoach. Well, so is Jack Macrae. They've both top scored for Supercoach in consecutive weeks this season. Macrae averages 116 Supercoach points against Richmond from his 13 career games against them. He returns to his home ground, where he's played 124 games at and averages over 100 at, so he's very comfortable playing at Marvel. And, look, it is Richmond. A positive matchup for inside midfielders. Admittedly, they aren't as leaky to midfielders as someone like West Coast, which I read out before, but they still give it up. We just saw Connor Rozee rip a 130 on them. There was also a Willem Drew 123, a Patrick Cripps 120. And if we go back to late last year, can I tempt you with a Sam Flanders 161, a Noah Anderson 128, a John Newcomb 161, an LDU 141, and a Nick Dacos 147. So yeah, they give it up all right. If Kane Corns isn't willing to rate Jack Macrae as good midfielder, I'll just happily laugh at him while I use him to lock in an elite Supercoach captaincy score this weekend. Now those are my favourite 9 captain options for this week, but as requested, here's a bunch of names that don't quite make the cut. I think they're going to have good weeks. I think you could roll with them as a captain for your draft leagues. You could do them in Classic, but as I said, I've just listed 9 that I think are going to be better at them, so I'm not necessarily recommending them, but for drafts, yes, absolutely. Jordan Dawson. I think he's going to have a very good game this weekend. Again, continue his hot form. Rowan Marshall and Toby Nankervis. This is an interesting one because if you look back through the data, every time these guys play each other over the last few years, they both smash out 130s. This is a matchup. I've been doing this captains for a couple of years, and every time I see these two play each other, I recommend them both because they both go 130s. I'm not as confident this year with Marshall's pelvis issues. I know he had a great week last week, but just the week before he wasn't playing much ruck. So I'm not as confident on him. But Nank, absolutely, lock Nank in. I think he's going to have a really big day. He was probably stiff not to make my top 9, to be fair. We'll put him on. We'll pretend he's number 10. So Nank's a good option. I think Zorko against Geelong at the Gabba is always a good option. Kieran Briggs against Meekie, I don't mind that one. I do have Lachie Neale here. I think if you've got Lachie Neale in draft, I think he's definitely worth a captain. It's fine. I think he does cop a little bit of a run with Mark O'Connor, but it's usually a light tag, not that hard, so I think he'll be fine. Christian Salem, interesting one here. In red hot form without Stephen May. Now against Gold Coast, who are one of the leakiest to defenders. If Stephen May isn't playing, I actually think Christian Salem could be a captaincy option here. More in draft. Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, as I said, you probably could do him in Classic as well against Richmond here, but I've preferred Jack Sinclair, but Nasiah's a good option. Jaden Short is an option. He started the year poorly, but a matchup with St Kilda, who give up really big points to defenders. If he's going to pop a spike score, it's going to be this week. Then Max Holmes, I think he's a good option, and Luke Jackson to round out the week. You know, if he's sole ruck again against that West Coast ruckman, I really like him as an option. So there we go. That's my round 3 Supercoach captaincy recommendations. I'm going to be VCing Tom De Koning for the 3rd week in a row, and I'm going to be following it up quite confidently with a Jack Macrae captaincy if needed. Good luck in round 3. As I said, as you can see on the screen here, you can find me at pig_DRC on Twitter. If you want to join and get involved with the Dr. Supercoach community, patreon.com/Dr. Supercoach. You can get involved with our community, always welcoming new members. So I'll see you there if that's what you're interested in.